I went on a hike the other day to enjoy the beautiful spring in the DC area, and wasn't too far into it before I picked up a nice hiking stick. And I realized I'd had my eye out for one, kind of semi-consciously from the beginning of the hike, and that I do this every time I hike or even just take a walk around an urban neighborhood. There's just something about having a stick in your hand that seems natural and right. Maybe it goes back to caveman days and sticks and clubs as weapons, having that comforting feeling that you can just whack something with the stick to defend yourself. But more than that, having a stick just adds a lot to the hike. Banging it on things to hear how they sound or to test their strength, poking things to see what's inside or underneath, slicing it through the air or through weeds like a sickle, throwing it in the river to see which path it'll take to float down. They really are great toys. I've seen kids have a lot more fun playing with sticks than just about anything. So I got to thinking of some stick idioms and thought they'd make a good theme for today's episode of Idiom America. And the first stick idiom that comes to mind is short end of the stick, which means to be at a disadvantage or treated unfairly, or to get a bad deal, a raw deal, get the shaft. When it comes to brains, you got the short end of the stick. Developing nations usually get the short end of the stick in global agreements. But what's a short end of a stick? The end of a stick can be pointy or thick or dirty, but short? Where'd that come from? Well, no one really knows. It's one of those linguistic developments whose precise origins have been lost to time, but that doesn't stop people on the internet from speculating and trying to support their theory with evidence. And there are some decent theories out there. One that makes a lot of intuitive sense but doesn't seem to have much support in the written record is that it refers to how loads used to be carried by people using sticks. Think of loggers placing sticks under a big log so that they could have one on each side, two in front, two in back. And the way leverage works is if you're carrying the end of the stick that's shorter, you're carrying a heavy load, getting a bum deal. Others speculate that this one has to do with drawing straws or drawing sticks to choose who gets to go first or who has to do some unpleasant task. You put a bunch of straws or sticks of varying lengths into your hand so that they appear to be of equal length, and the one that draws the short straw or short stick loses. But that's just a short straw or short stick, not an end of a stick, so it doesn't fit all that well. There's a similar kind of choosing game between two people where they each grab a hold of one end of a stick and try to break it, kind of like each grabbing hold of one end of a roast chicken's wishbone, and the one that ends up with the short stick loses, so that could be it. And then there are those that believe it comes from the term shit end of the stick as a minced oath or a type of euphemism based on a profanity or blasphemy that has been altered to remove the objectionable characteristics of the original expression. Polite version of an expletive is a minced oath. And believe it or not, there's a long history to this term that seems to predate short end of the stick. So it could be. Back in the late 1500s and early 1600s, the term shit stick was a fairly common way to refer to a miser. And this was back when the word wasn't quite as vulgar as it's now become. And there's also some support for this one to be found in some old-time hygienic practices. Apparently in ancient Roman toilets, in pre-toilet paper days, there was a sponge on one end of a stick that was used for wiping, so, you don't want to grab the wrong end there. Or when latrines were just a narrow trench in the ground, sticks were often used to cover up the trench with dirt when you were done. So there would be, again, that end of the stick you don't want to grab. And anybody who's done any backpacking is probably familiar with that one, using a stick to dig a hole and cover it up. But the origin story that can trace its lineage the furthest back is probably the one that relates to the similar expression, wrong end of the stick. And this one started out in the 15th century as the worse end of the staff. And then maybe 100 years later, staff becomes stick, and then later worse becomes wrong. And so worse end of the staff became wrong end of the stick. And there are those who posit that it just kept evolving so that worse became short and the meaning changed too. But while it's similar in meaning, wrong end of the stick actually has its own distinct meaning, as it refers not to getting the shaft or getting a raw deal, but to having the wrong idea about something, a misconception. It's often used with to get a hold of or to grasp, as in, as usual, the media got hold of the wrong end of the stick and present the whole problem in reverse. And as noted, this expression arose in the 1400s as worse end of the staff, and it originally referred to a walking stick that was held upside down, which doesn't help a walker as much. And from there, there's another theory that it could refer to what I like to call a poking stick. Whenever I'm sitting around a campfire, I like to have a stick that I use to poke the fire or to use as a torch. And so there's obviously a wrong end there that you wouldn't want to grab a hold of. Speaking of poking sticks, there's the idiom better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick, or just beats a sharp stick in the eye, or better than a poke in the eye. And kind of a rarer variation on sharp stick for this one is burnt stick. Better than a poke in the eye with a burnt stick. And this, of course, denotes qualified pleasure to refer to something that's not great, but still better than nothing, or that things could be worse. I mean, it was nice of her to get me something for my birthday, but what am I going to do with a bowling ball? Oh, well, beats a sharp stick in the eye, I guess. And a similar idiom is better than a kick in the teeth. And this is one of those that you can get creative with and come up with your own, and people get your meaning. So you could go with better than a kick in the pants, beats a kick in the head, better than a swift kick in the balls, beats a whack upside the head with a thick stick, and so on. And better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick has been around for at least a couple hundred years. In 1833, Nicholas I of Russia was reported to have remarked to Franz Joseph I of Austria, one emperor to another, at the end of a satisfying meal, that bowl of punch was better than a poke in the eye after a good dinner. In 1855, the Weekly Telegraph in Ireland has this observation: of Guinness's stout, I always observe that it's better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick. And of Alsop's ale, I invariably remark that it's better than a stab in the leg with an open razor. And so, as seen in these examples, this idiom can refer not only to qualified pleasure or something that's better than nothing, but can be used in kind of a humorous way to refer to something that you actually quite like. And while we're talking about people getting assaulted by sticks, there's another set of idioms dealing with getting hit with sticks to ill effect, like getting hit with the stupid stick or getting hit with the ugly stick. As in, man, I hate to be rude, but that guy really got hit with the stupid stick. And the ugly stick and the stupid stick are the standards, but once again, you can get creative with these and add whatever epithet you want, and it'll sound okay. She got hit with the crazy stick. He got hit with the stubborn stick. They all got hit with the evil stick. The meaning's straightforward. It's just a folksy, humorous, hyperbolic way of saying someone's stupid or ugly or crazy or stubborn or evil. You also hear this one less frequently as beat with the ugly stick or beat with the stupid stick. And there's another stick beating idiom, and that's to beat somebody off with a stick or to fight them off with a stick. As in, he has to beat the girls off with a stick. And it's used to refer to someone extremely popular or attractive. And the concept of beating pests off with a stick is, of course, a common one, and you see the phrase pop up hundreds of years ago in the literal sense to refer to beating off wasps or hogs, but it wasn't until the early 20th century that it started to be used to refer to keeping suitors at bay, usually in the form keep off, as in she's constantly having to keep men off with a stick. And by the 1950s, this had solidified into the current formulation of beating suitors off with a stick. And this one also might have evolved from a similar idiom that involves waving around a stick aggressively in the midst of abundance. And that's more XYZ than you can shake a stick at, as in there's more lawyers in the DC area than you can shake a stick at. Meaning, of course, that there's an abundance, possibly an overabundance of lawyers. And this one appears to have originated in the U.S. in the early 1800s. And it brings to mind for me the idea of a shepherd counting his sheep with his shepherd's crook, moving that hooked stick around as he points at each one and counts, and then just getting overwhelmed and starting to shake his stick in frustration. The origin of this one isn't known, however. It's really kind of surprisingly unknown, and so that's just a theory. But whatever the origin, it's now a fairly popular and colorful way to emphasize abundance and excess. And one more stick you might see shaking around is one that's strung with horsehair and used to play the violin, a fiddlestick. And that term for a violin bow, in the literal sense, that's been around since the 1400s. But it wasn't until Shakespeare had the line in Henry IV, "The devil rides on a fiddlestick," that the term fiddlesticks started to take on an idiomatic meaning. And by about the early 17th century, it had come to mean something insignificant or absurd, a mere nothing, a trifle. And from there, it evolved into a mild expletive or expression of frustration, which is the way it's mainly used today. So from Lord of the Rings, we get the hobbit Otho Sackville Baggins, disappointed with being willed spoons by Bilbo. Otho would have been Bilbo's heir, but for the adoption of Frodo. He read the will carefully and snorted. It was, unfortunately, very clear and correct, according to the legal customs of hobbits, which demand, among other things, 7 signatures of witnesses in red ink. "Foiled again," he said to his wife, "and after waiting 60 years. Spoons? Fiddlesticks." It's worth mentioning that Russians have a similar mild expletive, yolki-palki, which literally means fir tree sticks. And actually, this one's more of a minced oath, as it's similar to more vulgar expletives that begin with the same vowel sound. So it's a useful one to transition to if you start out with a bad swear and you want to convert it to a mild one, kind of like heck or darn or oh my gosh. And there's nothing inherently comic about a violin bow, or fir tree sticks for that matter. It seems that fiddlesticks was chosen just because it sounds like a funny word, like scuttlebutt or cockamamie or skedaddle. And there are a lot of these words that are real words, but kind of fun to say with such comic sounds that they sound almost like gobbledygook or gibberish or malarkey. Claptrap, balderdash, blather from a blatherskite. You know, words like willy-nilly or higgledy-piggledy, thingamajigs, thingamabobs, doohickeys, tiddlywinks, whirligigs, knickknacks and paddywhacks. Gobsmacked and flabbergasted, hoity-toity and hoi-polloi, hurly-burly and hurdy-gurdy, kowtow and flim-flam, bamboozle, razzmatazz, lollapalooza, humdingers, pollywogs and kerfluffles. And that's not even getting into insult territory, you know, the stuff from Sticks and Stones and Words and Bones. Words like lick-spittles and pettifoggers, rapscallions and ragamuffins, ninny-hammers and nincompoops, milksops, cattywampuses and hobbledehoys, smell funguses and snollygosters. All right, I'm starting to feel like I'm reading a Dr. Seuss book out loud, or like Willy Wonka. So let's end this episode with one more stick idiom, another insult, and that's stick in the mud, which is used, of course, to refer to a person who's set in their ways or someone who lacks a sense of adventure and does not appreciate change, an old fogey, a fuddy-duddy. Earlier versions of this one from the 1500s were stick in the briars or stick in the clay or stick in the mire. And this one has stuck around for a few hundred years for good reason. It evokes some good imagery that sticks with you of someone whose feet are stuck in heavy wet mud, clay, and unable to progress. With the added benefit of a stick in the mud being this kind of dull and brownish and unimaginative picture. A wasteland of mud with an isolated stick going nowhere, content to remain in its abject condition. The connection to the verb to stick, as in to be fixed in a particular position or unable to move, as in to be stuck in the mud, just adds to the sticking power of this one. Well, that's it for now. Until next time, speak softly and carry a big stick, my friends.